there's a single North Star, and that is adoption. No matter how amazing app you may have or tool you may have, if it's not used, if it's not solving somebody's problem, let's keep monetization aside for a moment, then you haven't done your job as a product leader.
Today's episode is brought to you by NCR Voyix, a global platform-powered leader in unified commerce for shopping and dining. Combining a flexible, intelligent platform with end-to-end payments capabilities and services developed through its deep industry experience, NCR Voyix empowers retailers and restaurants to accelerate new possibilities for their operations, experiences, and business outcomes. Amit Acharya is the Corporate Vice President of Product and Design for Retail Commerce at NCR Voyix, and he joins us on the podcast today. Amit, welcome to Retail Disrupted.
Natalie, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here and quite excited.
It's such a pleasure to have you on the show. There's so much happening in tech right now. And on this podcast, we're always looking at what's next, what's going to disrupt the industry, what's going to change the way that retailers operate and the way that we as consumers behave. Now, one topic that seems to have really moved up the agenda is agentic commerce. It's a huge conversation, and I know that it's something that you're personally very passionate about. So to get us started, can you firstly define what agentic commerce really is and whether you feel retailers are truly ready for this shift?
Yeah, exciting topic. I think that's the talk of the town, Natalie. So right, spot on. Agentic commerce, if you think about it, it's an evolution. It's an evolution of commerce systems from being very passive in the past to now being very goal-driven, very outcome-driven. And these goals are achieved and accomplished by what we call as agents, right? The agents can sense, agents can decide, agents can act autonomously to achieve the outcome that you're looking for. And this is across the retail value chain, from the back of the office, from front of the office, and the supply chain, within defined what I call as governance or guardrails, right? There are certain rules that you need to follow. So think about what happened to traditional banking 10 years ago or 15 years ago when fintech happened. And we are at that moment right now when we think about unified commerce towards agentic commerce. And so it's all about the operating model, how AI operates within that scope. And that's how defined as agentic commerce.
Yeah, so it sounds like things are going to get a little bit more complicated for retailers because not only do they need to work out how to sell to these AI agents, but they also still need to keep improving the experience for human shoppers. And of course, AI agents and human shoppers are going to have very different requirements. Humans are still going to want the simple pleasure and joy of online shopping. They're going to want inspiration when they're online, personalization. They're going to be looking for immersive, engaging experiences where, based on what you've just said, I think it sounds like AI agents are just going to want to optimize for things like relevance and availability, and it's just going to be very transactional. So my question to you, Amit, is from a design perspective, how does a retailer go about serving these very different needs?
Yeah, excellent question, Natalie. And I think you bring something very core to the table, which is whom are you solving the outcome for? That is the shopper, that is the attendant, that is the IT organization who's trying to manage and scale the systems across the board. At the same time, traditionally, we've defined software systems which were very, the pixel optimization, if I may, for human users. But now we have to actually account for digital agents as well. Agents in terms of looking for data, agents in terms of exposing the APIs, agents in terms of orchestrating across different workflows and removing those barriers so that the agent have access to, in the right governance model, to operate on behalf of the tool and system. So when we look at design, we actually optimize for, when we're thinking about design, we're optimizing on both the ends, right? Which is one is for the shopper, like you said, how can you make their engagement excellent? I'll give you, some of the research that we've done. There are three types of shoppers, or I would say buckets we all fall into, right? Or at least what we see a transition. One is a necessity shopper. I want to get in and get out. When my wife tells me to get certain items, I literally go and get those 5 things and nothing more. But on a weekend, I'm an entertainment shopper. I go with my kids. They try a little bit of cheese. They try a little bit of stuff, and I spend time. Necessity shopper is looking for choice, right? And I'm looking for value. And there is opportunistic shopper where I want technology to train me so I don't make mistakes. But if I make a mistake, it's okay, right? This is where agentic becomes even more critical, because if you think about how do you behave, create, design systems in the back end so that you can serve these shoppers. And now let's take an attendant. You don't want an attendant to, you want the attendant to be focused on serving you. If you walk into the store, it wouldn't be cool where somebody comes and say, "Hey, Natalie, I saw last time you bought this. May I help you with that?" Now, of course, there's an element of privacy. I get that. But to be treated, to be served, and you want their time to be well spent, how can agent help the attendant optimize that experience for you while taking menial tasks or repetitive tasks, which today attendants spend a lot of time on? So to your point, when we look in design systems, we are looking at across both the interfaces, right? Which is human interface as well as the agentic interface, and what do we need to define for and design for so that the experience is optimized for the end goal, for the end user. At the end of the day, from a retailer standpoint, what are they trying to optimize? The top line, the bottom line, and the experience, right? So that's how we think about it.
Yeah. And just to build on a point that you just made, do you feel that there will be some categories that are better suited towards this? Because your point about sometimes you just want to you want that fast, frictionless experience. You just want to get in and get out. And it really is just about convenience, availability, the bare essentials. Whereas other times you might want that discovery and that experience. And maybe you want to be a little bit more involved in making that final decision. I just wonder
Absolutely.
if maybe there will be this kind of bifurcation.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the human in the loop conversation is extremely relevant, and I think it's very important because we are here for context. We are here for allowing and optimizing the experience for the shopper. So in the example, there are certain repetitive tasks. For example, um, think about a scenario where my stock is running low, and I know that I'm gonna be restocking certain items, certain bread basket, which is very common, very commodity. I would want to automate that task. But in certain high value items, where if you're running stock in low, you want a human intervention. You want the manager to intervene and say, "Do I want to order this now or do I want to wait?" Because there's an impact to top line, bottom line. So I think it's going to be a journey in terms of which use cases you optimize first, which are very repetitive, which can be replaced easily through automation in terms of efficiency, allows the attendant to feed up. And then there are much more complex use cases which will get unlocked as agentic commerce matures enough in terms of, because it's not just technology. Technology is never a problem. I'll tell you that. I'm a techie. It's always the operating model around it. It's always about training people around it. It's always about coaching the technology to then coach us back in a way which makes a huge impact. So it's both, Jenny. It's as Natalie.
Yeah, and I want to come back to a point you just made, but first, I have one more question for you about agentic commerce, because it is such a
Yep.
fundamental shift for both shoppers and retailers. For shoppers, huge implications around discovery, trust, transparency. For retailers, like we just talked about, it's how do you design for this? How do you make sure your product data is clean and ready? And I think a more existential question that I'm certainly hearing from retailers is, look, this is coming. We can't ignore it. But how do we hold on to that relationship with the customer, especially if they can now complete their transaction in ChatGPT, in Gemini, or, as we've been discussing, completely outsource it to an AI agent? So my question to you, Amit, is what advice do you have for retailers who may be a little bit concerned about all this? Like, what's the risk of inaction here?
So yeah, I think that's a great question, Natalie. The most important thing is to understand that agentic or AI or any automation in the past are just means to an end. What I mean by that is you are just trying to help your shoppers with drive a superior experience while driving more footfall, whether it's digital or whether it's physical stores, and you're elevating their experience. While you're elevating their experience, you're trying to upsell, you're trying to cross sell, you're trying to make them come over and again. This is just on the shopper side. So I want us to think about agentic commerce as a tool to a means to an end. Right? How do you drive more footfall? How do you drive more experience? Number two is the same thing applies for your attendant. Look at what's happening with labor shortage in the market today, and all the labor shortage. I mean, they're all trying to work in some other platform. They're not going to come back and bag groceries or so. How do you elevate their experience in terms where they add more value to increase their footfall? That's number two, and then it goes back to third, which is the IT teams you talked about. Agentic is elevating their experience as well in terms of operating, keeping the lanes up and running where revenue keeps flowing and you want your lanes to be live in peak hours. You want your e-com business to be connected in a way that you can articulate the entire journey. My advice to retailers is to truly focus on the foundation, which is, do you have the right foundation? If not, then accelerate that foundation. What is foundation? Do you have a unified commerce platform? Do you leverage where you have a common source of truth when it comes to having central customer database or transaction database or a catalog or a pricing? A lot of disruption today, or a lot of heartburn today that we hear in the market, is about having these siloed systems. So having a unified commerce platform allows you to then unify all these silos from a technology standpoint, from a data standpoint, from an operating model standpoint. Once you have that, then leveraging any tools or technology where agentic commerce plays a key role becomes much more easier gap to fill versus starting from scratch. So my advice is to focus on, do you have a right platform to build upon, and if not, work towards that. Have an edge native stack that can be deployed on the edge in the lanes, which can manage your offline online capabilities, and then on top layer on agentic, which becomes a core native to how you want to address that challenge, or rather embrace it. Because to your point, I don't think it's a question of if, or we should, or we should not. It's going to happen, and you don't want to get left behind. So thinking about it in the right structured way, in my opinion, is much more, the feedback we've heard from the market as well, from customers, is how they're thinking about it, and we're helping them accomplish that.
Yeah. The worst thing you can do is stand still, right? This is a sector that just is
Totally.
constantly evolving. The only constant is change. I love that phrase. I think it's so relevant for retail. So I want to come back to that, and I want to come back to unified commerce as well. But if we just zoom out for a second and look at some of the broader shifts or trends, what are the big trends out there that you're observing and that you think are most impacting the sector right now?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent, again, question, because I see and live and breathe, we do all day all along with across the global customers, right? First of all, store formats are rapidly evolving. I saw that trend starting about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, but I'm seeing that picking up traction more and more, where grocery, hot foods, quick service restaurant is blending in. Add in fuel to it as well, where if you look at C stores today, they're becoming much more a place you want to stop with your family. You want to be there. It's nice, clean bathrooms, and little things matter. That's why I want to go back again. This goes back to my point earlier about footfall. What can retailers do to drive more footfall, right? And think about department and specialty. You see now cafes attached to them. You can go and actually have and eat, some nice cookies or cakes, or have hot coffee out there while you're shopping for a really nice dress for your wife. And it's all becoming more experiential. That's one shift, which is very important to understand, going back to agentic, because how do you tie a physical experience to a digital experience in a unified way and help agent drive optimization, workflow tasks, and such, so that you can drive football? The number two item I would say is unification of uh, experience at checkout. So back in the days, we had point of sale or cashier lane or self checkout lane, and we've moved on with that. It's just checkout. I mean, if you think about it, it's a mobile checkout, it's a smart card checkout, it's a cashier. It doesn't matter. What matters is, do you have choice for the kind of shopper entering your store? There is digitization of stores. So a lot of stores are now digitizing. If you may have seen in some of these stores here in the US, I see a lot more happening across Europe first, then go to Asia Pacific, and then it kind of comes to United States. Electronic shelf labels, right? Think about that. Computer vision, RFID systems, and they're all getting planted in the stores. You don't even know that's happening, but there's a lot of optimization happening, because imagine now you're pricing for a item that's going to go waste, right? Food waste happens in retail, and there's a massive challenge in the industry. If you could just mark down that digitally, right, remotely, how cool is that when a price item is $10, a day later it's nine, eight, seven, six, and now at the right opportune time, somebody will buy it. So you will actually make a purchase versus having a loss to it. So that's a massive shift happening. And then last but not the least is around experience. How do you give a unified experience to your shoppers working from a mom sitting at home? Hey, I want to buy online. I can build a basket, a virtual basket, but when I go to the store, that virtual basket actually becomes a physical basket, right? So all those journeys are blending in, Natalie, and I think it's like you said earlier, change is only constant here as I'm seeing it, and that moment of the fintech moment is happening as we speak, and unified commerce is here only to accelerate that. So yeah, those are the massive industry shift that we see it, and that's where we're looking to serve our customers.
Yeah, so let's dive into unified commerce because I know you've mentioned it a couple times already. So there's definitely more to unpack there. I as an analyst, I feel that, yes, there is this critical need to unify the experience, right? It's non-negotiable today. You have to offer that cohesive experience to your shoppers across the many, many touch points that exist, both online and in physical retail. And I think it's probably worth calling out that it's never been an easy thing to do, right? But it's becoming even more complex because if you think about the customer journey and the kind of proliferation of touch points, pre-purchase and
Right.
post-purchase on the delivery side. But we have AI agents, which we just talked about. We have social commerce. All of these things are just adding complexity and giving shoppers lots of different ways of accessing retail and really kind of muddying that path to purchase. Great for great time to be a shopper, but as a retailer, just a lot of complexity. So can you tell us, how should retailers get started with unified commerce, and what are some of the challenges that they might run into when they try to create that single source of truth, as you refer to it?
Yeah, I think that's a classic. I'll use some examples. We've seen or met retailers where systems are deployed 40 years ago, and those software systems are still robust and they're working. The challenge, though, is working is just not enough. How do you now elevate that experience that we talk about? And so it goes back to how do you drive to a common source of truth, which is a common selling engine, right? Which is your common orchestration tool which allows you to connect to your e-com channels or to your channels in the lane, in the stores, or maybe in the back office, a common supply chain. So many retailers are starting on that journey. They are looking at, and we have blueprints. We help them create blueprints to help migrate and lift and shift into this unified systems where now you connect this system through open API. So your platform allows you to have this common single source of truth, which then allows us to then connect with them APIs to kind of harness the data. And once you have a common system in place, then it's all about the operating model, right? How do you then take these modular services for that matter? Now, in the past, if you think about point of sale, it used to be a single application. It would do your tax calculation. It would do your, penny rounding. It would do all of in one big application, which is a massive lift for a customer or a retailer because think about upgrading that system. But as we move forward, unified commerce as well, the way these applications are decoupled, they are small microservices. Think of them as Lego blocks, right? Today, why does Lego work with pretty much any structure that we build? Because they are very standard. They have a contract, how to plug them in, and you can build whatever you want. This is how you have to break down these applications and services where they are small microservices, and they can be deployed in the cloud or they can be deployed on the lane. It doesn't matter. They can be deployed on back of the store. So this gives agility and flexibility to the retailers to have this common source of truth, if I may. And then beyond that, it's about designing the systems and operating model. Many times you also find that retailers themselves are not there yet because these things change so fast. But do you have the right change management process in the system? Do you have the right people, the right culture, the right tools to then operate the unified commerce? So it's not just about technology. It is a technology change, but also how do you drive an operating model around it, and which requires a very solid partnership, and which is what we're seeing with the retailers, where we work with them very closely in helping them redefine the change management process as well, because that's how you start the journey of building this unified commerce platform, and which is what we provide as out of the box as part of our engagement with our retailers.
Yeah, and it's really I think it's important that you call out that it's not just, when it comes to digital transformation, it's not just about technology, as you say. It is about organizational culture and bringing your people with you, and we'll come back to that in a second. But you touched on agility, and we know that unified platforms can really speed up operations. Can you give us a sense of just how much faster are we talking here, and what are the design decisions that make this possible?
What we've seen traditionally is it would take months, and I'm talking almost 9 months, 12-month cycles to make updates and changes. As simple as user experience. I want to run a survey on self-checkout terminal. Um, it takes me a long time, literally, and it's expensive because of how the monolithic architecture was deployed on the lane. And I'm going to talk about edge in a minute. How we think of edge as. It has reduced from months to minutes when it comes to technology. We've engaged with retailers in terms of designing systems that would from design to deployment in hours, right? And that is all possible because these applications, as I mentioned earlier, are smaller chunk of microservices which are can be deployed in the cloud or on the lane. What is extremely important is how do you handle these services in the edge? And when I say edge, edge as in running on the edge devices, for example, a pin pad or a device, a terminal in the lane, in the store. Why is it hard? Is because you don't control the environment. Um, think about a retail store, which could be in a far rural area where there's a LAN connectivity or network connectivity is really choppy. Guess what? It doesn't matter in retail. You have to keep these lanes running, right? The business has to go on. And hence the unified commerce platform with the ability to deploy on edge and manage it is extremely critical, because if my LAN or if my network goes down, I want to still transact. And when I get reconnected back again, then all the data sync happens, and system can collate and figure out all the information, right? So coming back to your point earlier, I think it's extremely important from that perspective on how we think about just modularity, but also scale, observability, and being able to observe them in real time. The other element of a system that I want to highlight here is also how do you drive observability? How do you keep managing your real estate of thousands of lanes and be proactive about it? Which is where again the unified platform is critical, because it can sense what's going wrong and can alert you. Now that's what I call as assistive AI. Now I'll tie back to agentic here quickly. Is think about if there's an agent listening to it, or rather watching out for it, which can say, hey, this lane is going to go down. Oh, by the way, I found out the printer is out of paper. It alerts somebody beforehand, and somebody's attendant goes there and replaces the paper before it goes out. Now lane is not down. So you see how the whole loop can be completed, but you cannot do agentic unless you have the right platform in place, right? Which is why it's both. It's not one or the other. It's how you think about it as a whole system plus change management on the next to it.
Yeah. So interesting. I'd like to talk about invisible tech, because there's often this paradox where the better the tech is, the less we actually notice it, right? And I think that's true for both customers and staff, that for tech to be working really well, it should just be invisible, it should just sort of fade into the background. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Amit. When you're designing for frontline teams, whether they're retail teams or restaurant teams, how do you approach the user experience so that the tools feel intuitive right from day one?
Yeah, I'll give you a very classic example of what I think I talked to you about, the opportunistic shopper, right? Um, think about, again, I'll give you an example of my kids. They go to self checkout and sometimes they forget to scan, right? I forgot to scan an item. It goes into the basket. We may end up walking out, right? It's a mistake. It's an unintentional mistake, but who's bearing the loss? The retailer is bearing the loss. It's a shrink. It hits my bottom line, and the margins, and retail is an extremely high pressured, low margin business, if you understand from that perspective. So how do we design systems to not make these mistakes happen, yet not make the shopper feel that, oh my God, this is such a huge technology uplift, which is what goes back to your point, is how can the technology be completely invisible? So when we design for such kind of shoppers, we look at digital nudges, right? And think of digital nudges as as parents, right? I'm a parent, right? So sometimes I have a soft conversation with my kids, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I have a hard conversation with them. So we design systems in such a way where you're scanning items, we will nudge you very softly. Say, hey, did you forget this item by any chance? Can you look at your bag again? And that allows me to train the shopper in a way where now I can, next time I'm not doing that mistake, right? So that's the classic example of what you're asking is how can technology be invisible? Technology is in the play, but you just don't know it's happening. But sometimes I'm intentional. I'm a criminal. I want to steal something. Every time it's going to put an alert, somebody's going to come and stop by and say, Amit, I think something is wrong with your bag. Let me rescan again, right? Nobody want a confrontation. So that's a classic example of what I call as how technology should be invisible. And when we design systems, we look at it across from all the elements, whether it's a point of sale, cashier checkout, an attendant app, right? I'm an attendant, and I want to get alerted, but I don't need the burden of understanding where to go and how to design. It's much more intuitive for me. And if the system talks to me what I need to do next, is much more important than me trying to find out what I need to do next, right? It's proactive versus reactive, and which is where, again, I'll tie back to agentic. I think there's a lot of promise and a lot of use cases. I'll also say it's our belief is that purposeful AI is more important, otherwise it's not useful. So we have to be very purposeful about how you build and leverage agentic versus just it being a cool term today, right, in the market. So we just have to be very careful about that balance.
Yeah, it's funny. I just had a CFO at a major UK retailer on the podcast, and she talked about the importance of boring AI and how that's what we should be focused on.
That's exactly right.
How can we, instead of, we're always talking about the shiny new thing and all the exciting use cases for AI. And sure, a lot of it's going to stick, but it's, there's a lot of low hanging fruit and focusing on those operational efficiencies. So yeah, really, really interesting. I just one kind of final question around this. When it comes to product design, how do you go about measuring success? Are you looking at things like speed or adoption rates or error reduction? So, like, what matters most in those cases?
What I tell my team, Natalie, is there's a single North Star, and that is adoption, right? No matter how amazing app you may have or tool you may have, if it's not used, if it's not solving somebody's problem, let's keep monetization aside for a moment, then you haven't done your job as a product leader. So we look at adoption of various technologies. So I'll give you another example here. You talked about invisible technology, right? And how do we tie that into adoption? So there's a massive gap in the industry around produce, right? When you put a produce, why do I have to enter 4011 for banana? The fact that I remember 4011 for banana is a I shouldn't, right? As a techie, I should not know the PLU number for banana, but I do, because that's how we train the organ, that's how we train the nation, right? But we've built technology where you just put your banana and it automatically says it's a banana and two other yellow things. So you remove the friction, the technology is completely invisible, and at the same time we track the adoption, which is now banana showing up within the top 3 items? Is the model accurate? Because we use AI ML behind the scenes. Is the model accurate? How many clicks have we reduced from the shopper? It used to be 5 clicks, and now it's 1 click. That's 20 microsecond. 20 microsecond times 10 people in the line is a lot of time spent. So now you're helping the necessity shopper that I was talking about earlier, right? So this goes back to tracking adoption at every level in terms of what outcome we are solving for, and that becomes a North Star. So again, goes back to agentic. It'll boil down to how is agentic being adopted in the back end. The shopper doesn't need to know we're using agentic, right? In terms of their mobile app, where they're building a basket and then going and we are giving them personalized recommendation. They walk into the store and automatically somebody stops by. It's all happening behind the scenes, and we will what we do is we track how each workflow is getting optimized for the shopper, for the attendant, and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's my key North Star in terms of building products.
Great. Amit, let's do a little bit of future gazing now, because you have a really unique vantage point working across both retail and restaurants, two sectors that are undergoing rapid digital transformation, where, as we've discussed, tech is reshaping customer experiences, it's reshaping operational efficiency, and even reshaping business models in some cases. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how you see physical store formats evolving as we move into this new era with both unified and agentic commerce.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely exciting times, Natalie. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here at NCR Voyix in the middle of this massive change and evolution happening. Uh, Physical stores are critical. We all want to feel in touch, and we all want to be served. We are humans, we need that. It's who we are as part of our DNA. So I think back in 2021 during COVID times, there was a massive shift around extremely digital inclination, and it was rightful then, right, for the right reasons. But what we saw is a scale back into this physical journey back again. So to your point, physical continues to stay and become a very pivotal element of the entire retail journey. I'll say it boils down to you know uh, you know 3 things, right, which is choice, value, and convenience. How do you offer that to your shopper, whether they are retail or restaurant individuals? It doesn't matter. And whether you serve them through digitally or physically, I think both are continuing to be relevant as you move forward. In fact, they are just blending in. We are seeing micro fulfillment centers getting closer to where we live because we want to get items delivered really, really fast. But at the same time, my family and some of us, we again go there to try and taste food. And that's where the engagement happens as well, right? So as I talked earlier about unification across the two modalities, multiple modalities, if I may. Then there is digitization happening in the store. And also there's a blending around retail and restaurant concepts as well. Because one is focusing on the flow, right? Restaurant is focusing on the flow, retail is focusing on, speed, checkout, but at the same time, they both demand accuracy. They both demand resilience in terms of how these systems work together, and that's how I see them evolve. So that's where we are pretty excited about.
Yeah, no, it is exciting, and I feel like we could be here for another hour because there's so many things to talk about, and there's so many exciting opportunities. You think there's a lot of disruption, but there's a lot of opportunities out there for brands that are willing to embrace this change. So, in closing, what advice do you have for those retailers and brands, the ones that are maybe tuning in today, trying to make sense of all this disruption? What should they be doing to future-proof their businesses?
Okay, I'll give you two things I want to talk about. Is one is edge. I didn't really unpack edge as much. Two lines, if I can add that, about resiliency, and then one is the example about retail and restaurant, and the third one is what will I tell them. That will need me like 2 minutes if you don't mind. So let me just give you two.
Take your time.
First,
Yeah.
then I'll come on this. Okay. So Natalie, let me give you an example of we talked about unification of formats and retail and restaurant explicitly, right? Think about an event which is driving a lot of you're selling a lot of French fries, for example, and now you're anticipating you're going to run out of potatoes. And what if your next grocery store can automatically deliver that before you even know you're going to run out? Imagine a system like that. You don't need to imagine anymore. This is where having the right foundational platform capability and having agentic use cases on the top behind the scenes, which are then predicting that you're going to run out of certain amount of material in the kitchen, which then goes to your approved supplier, human in the loop. And as soon as the supplier goes there, it then orders items, and then grocery ships you the item right then and there. So this is a classic case of agentic AI use case in helping both blend in the form and share.
What else should retailers be doing to future-proof their businesses?
Perfect. There are three things I always talk about with retailers, and when retailers talk to us about, Natalie, and it's a great question, by the way. First is stay focused on the outcome. What outcome are you trying to solve? For whom and why? Sometimes you're optimizing for cost, in and out. Shopper comes in, leaves the store, and perfectly fine. Sometimes you're optimizing for engagement. You want to upsell. You want to have them drive more engagement, whether it's digital or physical, doesn't matter. So I think most important thing is to focus on the outcome. Stay focused. Who are you? What are you doing? And why? That's very, very critical. Second thing is foundational elements to then drive more enhancements, engagement, and experience. What I mean by that is we talked a lot about unified commerce. We talked about the components of unified commerce. Look into your stack. Look into where the inefficiencies are. Do you have a single source of truth? Do you have applications built as services that can be decoupled so that will unlock agility? You need to know what your agility quotient is, AQ, if I may, right? Which will then improve your ROI towards business. And then lastly is practical use cases of agentic commerce, if I may. We all get carried away by, and I'm a techie, I love to read and I love to try a lot of things, but then focus on practical applications versus trying to boil the ocean or trying to go get swayed by different things. That extreme focus is super critical at a very senior executive level, so you know what you're trying to accomplish and why. So again, I'll reiterate, it's focus on the outcome, focus on the foundational element, and the last is the practical agentic commerce use cases.
Amit, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. And to our listeners and viewers, if you are at Euroshop in Dusseldorf next week, make sure to stop by the NCR Voyix booth, or you can learn more at ncrvoyix.com. Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.